and welcome to another SciFirst MovieTalk episode. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the 2012 found footage science fiction movie Chronicle, as directed by Trank. The movie introduces us to Andrew Detmer, as played by Dane DeHaan, a high school student who suffers quite badly at the hands of his dad's physical abuse, as played by Michael Kelly. Kind of ridiculed and taunted and physically bullied by the students at his school, and kind of coping with the emotional pain of having a terminally ill mother, as played by Bo Peterson, with little means to kind of afford the medication she so desperately needs. He then decides to film everything, as you do in his life from that point onwards, I'm sure, kind of for evidence and as a kind of coping mechanism. Much again to the ridicule of those around him. One night, however, he attends a rave with his best and kind of really only real friend, his cousin Matt Garrity, as played by Alex Russell. And what starts out as kind of a fairly innocuous evening for him anyway, soon kind of turns out into something a whole load more. Kind of dark and mysterious when popular student Steve Montgomery, as played by Michael B. Jordan no less, comes rushing up with the promise of a fantastic discovery which must be filmed, aka Andrew's talents are now needed. Or rather his camera is. The three, they stumble across a very strange glowing object deep underground that has kind of a strange presence all of its own. A few days later, having no memory of how they actually returned home, they kind of find that they begin to have telekinetic abilities, the power to move objects with their mind. What starts out as the kind of ability to move small changes, to move small objects and make small changes to the surrounding environment, kind of soon progresses to them being able to move larger and larger objects, and even progressing to them being able to fly. At first, the powers, they do result in some quite humorous practical jokes. However, as Andrew's home life kind of worsens and deteriorates, so does his mental state, and soon the powers offer a tempting way to become the apex predator once and for all, taking him down a dark path and pitting him against his friends. So, the first thing to note about this movie is that it has kind of a real human element overall. You know, indeed, focusing more on this than the sci-fi elements for the most part. And by that, I know it's live action, but what I mean is that it tells the story from the human perspective. In fact, technically, quite uniquely, from the perspective of the movie's antagonist, Andrew. He doesn't start out that way, but does develop, but develops as his power kind of increases and the abuse that he suffers escalates. In this respect, the film does make you feel for him as an antagonist. You certainly do sympathise with him. And although there are some shocking moments, you do find yourself actually rooting for him at times. All the time, the film makes you think that if life had kind of been, life had dealt him a different hand, that perhaps, at the end of, the end of his story would have been so much different. But then, obviously that wouldn't have made for much of a climax, of course, which I must say in this film is quite impressive. Cleverly, although this is a found footage movie, because of the powers that the three friends actually develop, the main cameraman, Andrew, actually learns to hover the camera in place, which actually means they do kind of get away with a more polished feel than other found footage movies, which I think actually does detract from the overall experience a little. But it is then restored for the end sequences as we get to see the action unfold. I was going to say animation, but the action unfold through a number of other cameras, sort of like the phone, CCTV, which does make you then remember, of course, you are watching a found footage movie after all. For the most part, the film does actually feel quite fresh, taking kind of a Carrie-esque plot with a really intriguing sci-fi twist. I do enjoy the antics of the characters once they actually do get their powers, and it's a shame, I think, to some extent, that this wasn't in fact a comedy. But I do enjoy the science fiction at work here nonetheless, and although telekinesis, yes, it's nothing new, it's all been done before, and indeed to better effect for the most part. The fact that we actually use, the personal camera angle to follow the characters on a personal level is different, and certainly gives that film a distinct edge. The bond between the characters is strong. It's interesting to see that develop along with the powers that they have, and how these three unlikely lads do develop a friendship through this shared experience, which, until things actually then go a bit pear-shaped, is actually fun to see, and helps keep the mood light for pretty much the first kind of 3/4 of the film, as kind of a counterbalance to Andrew's ever-growing abuse and ultimate disassociation from those around him. The special effects, they are quite decent for the most part, although they can seem a little off at times, certainly when they're in flight and things like that. However, indeed, as I tipped on earlier, the film does have quite a spectacular finale, pretty powerful all told, for all of the reasons that I've already stated. The way that this movie makes you feel and even care for both the protagonist and the antagonist is quite special, such that by the end, what has to be done, it is all the more shocking. However, there are parts where it does feel a bit lacking, not quite as punchy as it could have been, and although it is quite a short film, coming in at around about an hour and a half, I think, it does feel a bit longer than this, if I'm honest. It's not that it's boring, far from it, in fact. It keeps things entertaining throughout for the most part, but I must admit that when the characters weren't using their powers, they were a little dry, and apart from Andrew, we never really have them padded out to any great fashion, other than kind of paying lip service to some of their history. Additionally, as this was a found camera footage film, at times it was hard to actually understand how the footage was actually put together. Now, I know a lot of films in this genre very rarely tell you how and when and where the footage was actually found and per se, but we actually get to see the interaction of other characters via video footage, not actually shot by Andrew. In fact, he was never actually present for some of those scenes. So it did kind of actually, it made the fact that this was supposed to be a real footage film a little harder to believe, if you kind of see what I mean. But overall, for the most part, it is an entertaining movie. The angle used to tell the story puts kind of another spin on what could have been by now a tired formula. The found footage movie stuff had been done many times before this. But the addition of the sci-fi elements in kind of that personal way to the characters that we meet along the way really does allow the audience to feel connected, I think, and very sympathetic to their story and the plight of each of the three main characters, in particular Andrew, whose transformation in the films or into the antagonist is very bittersweet and quite a very hard pill to swallow, given the kind of relentless abuse that he suffers at the hands of his father and of the other students at his school. Which, at least, some of this could make it very relatable for many, I'm sure. I know that the physical bullying hits home for me, It doesn't raise the bar to any great extent. The special effects are mostly on point, but can sometimes feel a little bit off. But it is certainly an intriguing film with plenty of fun moments, especially as the trio do discover the full extent of their powers. I mean, who hasn't dreamt of yielding such a power themselves? You know, I've been dreaming of it since Carrie, you know. What would you do with it, you know? And I think the film asks that question. So, that brings me to the end of this episode. Thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, please leave a like. Please do hit that subscribe button for more movie reviews, trailer reactions, and other movie-related content. We have absolutely loved having you here at SciFirst MovieTalk. We would definitely love to have you back. But most of all, just thank you very much for watching. Goodbye.